Chapter 10. The next day, the partners called a meeting. Every human in the show crammed into the center car. Kayla showed up late. Jeanson was nowhere to be seen. In fact, no one ever saw Jeanson again. Rumor had it that the other breathers had chopped him up and fed him to the lions. Joachim saw on Charles's face that he had thrown Jeanson off the train. Charles was the largest of the acrobats and had taken a liking to Kayla. Joachim imagined his rage when he found Kayla stoned and vomiting from the route. He knew what had happened, but said not a word. The meeting was called to announce the retirement of George from the show business. He wished them all luck, but said he would leave after the next show to pursue a spiritual quest in the East. There were a few tears, a few cheers, but the performers really didn't care as long as their salaries were paid. George shrugged and waited out the next 2 days until his final show. 2 years after that meeting, Joachim became fed up with the circus and left it in the hands of James. He began to think about his idea to study a human social system, and he pondered the ways to gain enough capital to create such an experiment. He headed back east into France and returned for the first time in over 300 years to his father's land. It took some time, but he found the records of that time. His would-be wife had given birth to a son, and the Count had raised him as if he were his own. Joachim then spent the next 4 years tracing his bloodline through Europe. In 1914, when the heir to the Austrian-Hungary throne was assassinated, Joachim found himself landlocked in Central Europe just as the World War began. Being a man without national status and in the middle of a war-torn continent, he took it day by day and eventually made his way west. His bloodline had moved to America 2 generations earlier, and he was adamant about locating his descendants. After the war had ended, he crossed the Atlantic again. He searched the Midwest and came across a family that had descended from him. He was shocked to see how striking a resemblance the youngest daughter, Estella, bore to his long-dead Gloria. Under the guise of a relative fleeing the destruction in Europe, the family accepted him. He held history of the family that the others marveled over. He worked as a carpenter, which was the family trade. America was rising as a new and powerful nation, and Joachim's grasp of both technologies and foreign languages helped the business to become the largest in the state. It was a happy time in life for him. He felt settled and strong among his family. He had caught himself watching Estella on more than one occasion. It took a lot for him to hold back on his feelings for her image. He channeled that energy into working to build the family fortune. Although America was valuing her privacy at this point in history, news of the constructive genius made it into papers worldwide. It was because of one of those articles that in 1929, Joachim received an overseas telegram from India. It read, "Spiritual awakening equals enlightenment equals timeless." He smiled at the thought of George spending money on conveying that message to him. It lifted his spirits, and his spirits needed it as the economic depression had hit the country. The worst of the depression was soaked up by those who lived on the eastern coast or in large cities. The rest of the country felt it, but by the time it reached out west, the results of it were somewhat dampened. The family business plugged on and moved south, building up territories for the people who were fleeing west to avoid the hardships. Joachim couldn't help notice how the heart of the nation seemed to move from the eastern seaboard to the center of the landmass. He pondered this movement of humanity and spent the next 10 years sharpening his painting skills to create a portrait of America's rise to greatness. He had seen it time and time again in the past. A new nation oversteps its bounds, only to become wiser and more powerful afterwards. He felt the need to create hope for those people. The painting was never completed, and in the back of Joachim's mind, he linked that to America's decision to enter World War II. The family business made deals with Uncle Sam and was soon rolling in dough while building weapons of destruction, despising himself for being a supplier for the war, but enjoying the fact that America was fighting a great wrong being done in Europe. Joachim decided to karmically balance America's worldwide collective spiritual account. So he invested in hemp harvests and snuck the weed into the United States in large quantities. Later on, he realized that he had done it for the profits and just needed a justification for his actions. Realizing he had done a great wrong to this developing nation, he moved west, crossing the Pacific and landing in Japan. From the defeated nation, he began his accumulation of knowledge and technology. He invested in companies that paid back large dividends, and soon after, he started Biocen. By 1966, he had moved the company to Thailand because of the lack of media exposure. By 1970, he began employing the top scientists in biology and technology. In 1974, he employed his descendant, Christopher DeLuca. In 1976, he drew up the final blueprints for the biodome. In 1988, after Christopher expressed the impact the project would have on the environment, Joachim fired him. It was in 1989 that he received the letter. It was addressed to him from San Francisco. My friend, I am well, as I guess you are. I no longer reside in India, as I have completed my spiritual schooling. I have taken up residence in the United States of America in the city of San Francisco. I have traded in my days of running around without destination and have settled here. I have married a young woman and I live with her here as I own and run an organic produce company. I write you for 3 reasons. First, I wish to relay some of the wisdom my deceased master had taught me. I hope it serves you well. Enlightenment comes in the moment that one not only perceives and interacts with the surrounding world, but also perceives and manipulates the self as part of those surroundings. Participation in the divine includes pushing the mind to recognize itself as a component in and of this world, having no greater value than any other component. God is the word used to relate the idea of spiritual awakening by those who can't comprehend such a notion without envisioning a conscious body. The word was created to convey the meaning of awareness to those who are just beginning the journey, and is used by those who have yet to reach a state of enlightenment. Secondly, I have heard news that you are taking steps towards creating the controlled environment to study human sociological behavior. My guess is that it is a large undertaking that could use some of the modern miracles that have currently made my life easier. Computerizing my business has made living a hell of a lot simpler. The team I use to complete the project is currently working elsewhere at the moment, but if you decided to do so, Michael Coughlin is the best man for the job. He put all account information into a mainframe, which cut down on the paperwork and gave me more time to spend with my new wife. That reminds me of the third reason. My wife has a child from a previous marriage, a daughter. She is an artist who lives on the island of Manhattan. I don't see her that much, but that is beside the point. The thing that interested me about this woman was the way she told me about the family story of her ex-husband, how his bloodline, if traced back far enough, would lead to tales of the pirate prince. Small world, is it not? Your friend through the ages, George F. Dmitry. Joachim put the letter away and took his friend's advice. He searched out Michael Coughlin and found him to be a friend rather than business associate. He put his project on hold and spent some time with his newfound companion. He had to agree with George about the world's size when he came across Farah in the Russian tea room. He knew right off the bat that she was his descendant. She looked like his Gloria, more so than Estella did. So he lived his life and loved the life that had eluded him for so long. He sent his friend to Thailand to build a mainframe. He spent time with his great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter, getting to know her, never letting on who he was, or that he had employed and known her father. Although he was drawn to her physically, he knew that Michael was her rightful suitor, so he resigned himself to the role of her protector. When Michael returned, however, the dam broke. He knew something was wrong when she showed up at the apartment complaining of a feeling she had, that something terrible was going to happen. He felt it too, but could not pinpoint it. When she showed up, he knew what was going to happen. He took her aside and told her that it was her father's presence she felt, that he would be coming to try to stop the project that Joachim had worked on for a lifetime. She looked into his eyes and saw something that made her lean away instinctively. It was as if the whole 435 years were being conveyed through his eyes to her. The eyes are the portals to the soul. Then the commotion from the other room. He ran out to see Christopher running from the room with the discs. Michael grabbed him and Christopher turned and shot his ancestor in the left shoulder. Death had approached him for the first time. It swung into the room and circled like a vulture over a dehydrating animal. He felt its cold blade run down his back. He felt his soul float towards the freedom. He would be unchained from this existence and return to the great fire. He understood what Jensen had meant when he spoke of being trapped in existence. Farah lifted his face from the floor and held it in her hands. He felt his consciousness rush back into his wounded body. She managed to lift him from the floor and move him to the chair. She checked the hole in his shoulder, looking at her, envisioning his long-lost Gloria behind her eyes. He pulled her into him and kissed as if he would do nothing else ever again. He winces at the thought of that moment now. What was he thinking? He shivers, unsure if he does so because of his disgust for himself, or if he was just too woozy to be out on the street. His little secret has been discovered by the doctors who saved his life. He had to leave that hospital. He walks through the city streets in the clothes he has stolen. His shoulder is sore to the point of numbness. He gets to a payphone and reaches out to touch the only person who comes to mind.